Imagine leaving home for a simple 3-hour drive, only to return 10 days later with no memory of where you've been. That's exactly what happened to Alec Newald. His shocking claim? He was abducted by aliens, lived among them for over a week, and returned with proof so unsettling that authorities tried to silence him. What did Alec really see? Were his memories authentic or planted? And why did intelligence agencies suddenly take such a keen interest in him? Today, we'll unravel his story, his so-called evidence, and the extraordinary secrets he revealed. On February 1989, Alec Newald left his hometown of Rotorua, New Zealand, intending to make a simple drive north to Auckland. It was a trip he had made many times before, a journey of about 3 hours by car. He carried no luggage, no grand plan, just the expectation of arriving at his destination the same afternoon. But when Alec finally returned, it wasn't hours later. It was 10 days later. And in those 10 days, he had no memory of what had happened to him, nor any explanation for why he was allegedly missing. Imagine the shock of his family and friends who had reported him missing after his failure to arrive. The police had been drawn into the mystery, launching a search for his car and any trace of his whereabouts. To them, this wasn't a man who had wandered off voluntarily. This was a disappearance that defied reason. When Alec finally appeared, again he was greeted not with relief alone, but with a mixture of disbelief, suspicion, and overwhelming curiosity. To those who knew him, the man who returned seemed the same, and yet not quite the same. Neighbors and relatives were stunned. "Where have you been?" they asked him. The police wanted answers as well. Alec himself was confused by the intensity of the response. To him, the trip had been continuous. He had gotten into his car, begun the drive, and then, in what felt like no more than a blink, found himself again in Auckland. It wasn't until he looked around, saw the crowd that had gathered, and heard the voices of people saying he had been gone for 10 full days that the enormity of the situation struck him. The physical toll was evident. Alec complained of terrible headaches that wouldn't subside, a persistent tiredness that made even simple tasks difficult, and a strange inability to focus. These weren't the signs of a man who had simply hidden away for a few days. It was as though his body had endured an ordeal beyond his comprehension, even if his conscious mind could not recall it. At first, Alec could offer no explanation. He had no story to give the police, no timeline to reconstruct, and that only deepened the mystery. His alleged missing car was another question mark. Some said it was never accounted for in the official record. Others claimed it was found, though Alec himself could not clearly recall what had happened to it. What he did know was that his reality had fractured. Time for him had passed in the blink of an eye, while for everyone else, he had been gone 10 days. The local community buzzed with speculation. Some whispered that he had suffered a mental breakdown. Others believed foul play might be involved. Still others pointed to the uncanny strangeness of his reappearance as proof of something beyond explanation. In the late 1980s, New Zealand was not accustomed to UFO lore and abduction stories in the mainstream. Alec's situation seemed like the stuff of science fiction, yet here he was, a flesh and blood man standing in front of them, unable to explain where he had been. Then the fragments began to surface. Not immediately, but slowly, like memories leaking back into consciousness after a dream. At first, mere flashes, disjointed images, sensations of lightness, weightlessness, and otherworldly presence. Alec learned to fight them again, contending with the reality that these were nothing but hallucinations emitted by his mind. Slowly but steadily, they formed an edifice of narrative. Those about him saw a withdrawn young man who was quietly wrestling with an unexpressed bond that had begun, manifesting way before. The headaches continued, as did the fatigue. It appeared to be caught in a state of resigning itself to being viewed by the world, while there was an inner world buried deep inside his mind, and into that inner world, Only he knew something had happened with profound meaning between those 10 lost days. But he was not going to let that happen. He had to let those memories, how the actual beginning would emerge, continue pressing against the frontiers of his awareness. But as the pieces of his memory returned, what Alec described would shock not just his family, but the entire world. Inside the extraterrestrial world, journey to an alien city, communication with advanced beings, and revelations of Earth's true history. Once, Alec accepted that he was no longer on Earth. His surroundings began to shift. The endless glowing void gave way to something more structured, more tangible. Slowly, he became aware of shapes in the distance, lines, curves, and patterns that looked nothing like the towns or cities he had known back home. What emerged before his eyes was a sprawling metropolis unlike anything humanity had ever built. The first thing that struck him was the scale. The city seemed to stretch endlessly along a coastline, its boundaries disappearing into the horizon. Even from his vantage point, Alec could see that it was vast, covering an area so immense that the largest human cities seemed like small villages in comparison. Yet what made it truly alien was not its size, but its design. Buildings rose up from the ground in unfamiliar shapes. Many were low, circular structures with smooth surfaces that glowed faintly as though lit from within. Among them stood occasional pyramid-like constructions, shimmering with what looked like tinted glass or translucent crystal. From their peaks rose spiral towers, twisting upward into the sky like giant antennas. At the top of each, Alec noticed something remarkable. Enormous orbs, like giant light bulbs, glowing softly and radiating a strange energy. These were not decorative spires. They felt functional, pulsing with purpose. Everywhere he looked, he saw symmetry and balance. The streets curved gently, blending seamlessly into the architecture. There were no hard corners, no cluttered rows of concrete or steel. Instead, the entire city seemed to flow, as if designed with both aesthetics and energy in mind. It was clean, almost impossibly so. There was no sign of decay, no smoke, no pollution. Alec felt as though he was standing in a world where technology and environment had been harmonized, not forced against one another. Even more astonishing was the atmosphere of the place. It wasn't just a city of glass and stone. It seemed alive, humming faintly, as though the buildings themselves were in communication with one another. Later, Alec would recall the impression that the architecture was made from materials unknown to Earth, semi-transparent, resilient, and possibly organic in nature. To him, it felt as if the structures were grown, not built. The beings who guided him through this alien city moved calmly, showing no sign that they considered it remarkable. To them, this was simply home. To Alec, it was enough to say that the details were too much. He felt like an infant who had entered a technological paradise, where every structure, every pathway, seemed to enjoy a subtle hint of meaning or designated purpose. He was led to what he called his own quarters, a home within this city for his interim stay. The rooms inside were simple and elegantly built with curves instead of corners, brightened with light rather than luggage. The space seemed to alter itself for his requirements, as though the walls themselves responded to his presence. Not luxury by human appreciation, but one that chilled him with its nonchalant perfection. Yet Alec soon realized that his abduction or invitation wasn't for sightseeing. The beings made it clear. He had been brought here not just to observe, but to learn. This was a deliberate encounter, one in which knowledge would be passed on to him so he could return with it to Earth. And the knowledge they shared wasn't random. It was about Earth's hidden history, secrets humanity was never meant to know. It was within this alien city that Alec met the being who would change everything for him. She called herself Xena, a female among the group. though her appearance hardly fit human ideas of gender. Her presence was calming, her communication gentle yet precise, as though she had been chosen to guide Alec through truths he was not meant to discover alone. Unlike the others, Xena seemed to understand his doubts and fears, reassuring him with thoughts that flowed into his mind like whispers of clarity. Xena explained that Alec's visit was not random. Humanity itself was the reason he had been brought here. According to her, Earth was a unique world, a jewel in the universe. But its history was not what humans had been taught in schools, nor what religions and science books had agreed upon. Humanity, she said, was a designed species, created, shaped, and guided by beings like her people in cooperation with others who came before. She spoke of Cro-Magnon and Homo sapiens not as random outcomes of natural evolution, but as purposeful creations. Cro-Magnon, she said, was one of the first attempts, a vessel designed to carry a second essence, a spirit that could live and learn within a physical form. It was a step in a long experiment, the blueprint for the humanity that would later emerge. Then came Homo sapiens, refined and adapted. This newer form was capable of not only living but remembering, accessing knowledge across generations. Holding humanity was never meant to be accidental. It was a carefully guided design. But there was a tragedy in Xena's tale. At some point in Earth's past, a darker force had intervened. This force, she claimed, saw humanity's potential and feared it. Humans were on a path toward enlightenment, developing strong spiritual awareness that could rival even the entities who manipulated the stars. To stop this progress, the dark force interfered with human development, crippling them at a genetic level. According to Xena, humanity's DNA had been altered, weakened, and deliberately suppressed. Powers that should have been awakened, spiritual abilities, heightened consciousness, deeper understanding, were sealed away. Humans became fragmented, disconnected from the fullness of who they were meant to be. What remained was only a shadow of the greatness they could have achieved. Listening to her words, Alec couldn't help but connect the story to myths he had grown up hearing. Nearly every religion and culture described a fall from grace, a time when mankind had been stronger, wiser, closer to the divine, before some event caused them to lose their power. Christianity speaks of the fall of man in Eden. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe God shaping and reshaping humanity. Even myths from Greece, India, and the Americas talk of golden ages when humans were closer to the gods before a catastrophe or betrayal brought decline. Was Xena describing the same story in different words? To Alec, it seemed possible. The parallels were too strong to dismiss. She claimed that Earth's hidden history was not a series of coincidences, but the result of deliberate intervention, both benevolent and malevolent. Humanity had been uplifted, then brought down, and still carried within them the scars of that ancient conflict. Xena said to Alec that a lot of ancient knowledge had not completely vanished. It had been preserved by certain sects, found in various places across the planet, waiting for the right time when humanity could remember again. Sacred places, pyramids, monuments, these are not just structures, but memory remindings, encoded, messages gifted to future generations by the ancients who had walked this earth. The very point was that the awakened humanity awaits, but the dark force is going to delay it for thousands of generations. For Alec, all shocks. He had looked forward to accepting nothing but confusion and fear, albeit he now found that humankind exists as the result of a horrific struggle in a greater cosmic contest. The implications transformed his mind into jelly. If Xena was indeed true, then just about everything that mankind understood about its origins, science, religion, and history was incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. But Alec's revelations didn't just challenge history, they threatened powerful people here on Earth. Your section begins here. Truth, lies, and the price of exposure. That's what happens when you claim to have spent 10 days with aliens, and return with knowledge that challenges the very foundations of our reality. Alec Newald's story didn't end with his return. In many ways, that was just the beginning of an even more complex and unsettling chapter. Because the moment he started talking about his experience, he stepped into a world of government intimidation, public revelation, and the enduring mystery of what really happened to him. Imagine this. You come back from a 10-day absence with fragmented memories of an alien city and claims of a hidden history of humanity. Initially, most people would brush it off as a delusion. But what if powerful entities started taking an unsettlingly keen interest in your every move? What if things started happening that couldn't be explained away as coincidence? That's precisely what Newald said began happening when he started sharing his story. According to Newald, almost immediately after his return, the government started watching him, subtly at first. Unfamiliar cars would park near his house, and he'd spot the same people in various locations, watching him. It was the kind of low-level surveillance that's hard to prove, but leaves you feeling deeply uneasy. This constant feeling of being scrutinized intensified. He experienced phone lines cutting out during important conversations, letters disappearing from the mail, and strangers who approached him asking questions about his activities. It wasn't long before Newald realized this wasn't just paranoia. Someone was definitely trying to keep tabs on him. Newald said the surveillance was only the beginning. The attempts to silence him eventually escalated into something far more tangible and threatening. He described a sting operation designed to discredit him. The government knew he was a mechanic, so they set him up with an operation of stolen cars. The government's trap, designed with elaborate care, was sprung. He got the deal, bought the cars, and suddenly police and prosecutors began building a case against him. This seemingly unrelated case became a tool to put immense pressure on Newald. As Newald's life was being torn apart by legal battles, figures from intelligence agencies approached him. According to Newald, they gave him a choice: cooperate and tell them everything he knew about the aliens, or face the full force of the law and continue enduring the nightmare they had carefully constructed. They offered to make all his legal problems disappear in exchange for complete disclosure. This apparent attempt to silence and discredit Newald raises a critical question. If his story was nothing but a fabrication, why would the government devote such significant resources to suppressing it? Wouldn't the easier course of action be to ignore him, or perhaps simply label him as mentally unstable? The lengths they supposedly went to suggest that Newald's story might have struck a nerve, perhaps revealing truths someone wanted to keep hidden. Instead of submitting, Newald says he chose to resist. He fought the charges, but the legal battle took a significant toll on his finances and personal life. After going through a long, drawn-out legal battle, he was found guilty and served a portion of his sentence in jail. But Newald says he never gave them the full details of what he experienced. For Newald, the persecution solidified his resolve. He saw that he needed to take his story public. Silence, he realized, was a trap. Speaking out was his best defense. He decided to write a book detailing his experiences, hoping that exposure would make it more difficult for anyone to quietly silence him. This is where Newald's story takes another fascinating turn. He published Coevolution, an Interplanetary Adventure. This detailed account of his alleged alien abduction was filled with striking images and bold revelations. Newald outlined his encounters with extraterrestrial beings, their advanced technology, and their philosophical perspectives. Crucially, the book delved into claims about humanity's origins and the interference of higher powers. It wasn't a vague recollection of a brief encounter, but a detailed narrative of life among advanced beings and insights into suppressed human history. The book was packed with sketches of the alien city and discussions with Xena. The core message was that humanity's evolution had been deliberately manipulated and that humans possessed untapped potential. It was a message that resonated deeply with some and was dismissed as pure fiction by others. The release of Co-Evolution ignited a storm of reactions. For some, it was the confirmation they had been waiting for. It was proof that humanity was not alone in the universe and that powerful secrets were being kept from the public. To them, Newald was a courageous whistleblower, risking everything to reveal suppressed truths. For others, the book was a work of pure fantasy. Skeptics pointed to the lack of verifiable evidence and dismissed the account as imaginative fiction. Psychologists suggested that Newald's memories could be explained by stress, hallucination, or subconscious influences. The silence from official sources was deafening. No government agency came forward to debunk the book. No mainstream scientists engaged in detailed critiques, and the media largely ignored the more extraordinary claims. To some, this silence was further evidence of a cover-up. Why, they asked, wouldn't the authorities debunk the book if it was a complete fabrication? The lack of official denial only fueled speculation and suspicion. The book became a touchstone within UFO circles, spawning discussions and debates about the true nature of human history and the potential for contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Despite the skepticism and controversy, Newald's story continues to resonate with many. Decades after his initial claims, the mystery remains unresolved. Was he a truth-teller who dared to reveal dangerous knowledge, or a skilled storyteller who created an elaborate fantasy? Perhaps we'll never know for certain, but the unanswered questions continue to intrigue us, urging us to consider the possibility that reality may be far stranger and more complex than we imagine.